Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Dan McClure, who sort of got a lot of this going. He was a professor of English at San Diego State, and when Gary Snyder came to town to read poetry somewhere, Dan asked Gary to read here a few years ago, which he did. Gary, in turn, gave us Allen Ginsberg's telephone number, and Allen came, and we were delighted to have him, and now we're very happy to have Michael McClure here. And as Jerry Rothenberg was so gracious as to introduce Allen Ginsberg, he in turn has agreed to introduce Michael McClure, so that seems only fitting. I leave it with Jerry Rothenberg.
Thank you, Professor Wills. It's my very great pleasure to be able to introduce Professor McClure tonight in a world in which we are all professors. And it is a great pleasure. I think that Michael and I first came together when he helped me to see in 1968 or 1969 the implications of what I had worked out on my own in Technicians of the Sacred, which was my book at that time. I had for years before been gathering materials and texts that involved specifically outcroppings of poetry in areas and cultures outside the accepted literary mainstreams. From Michael and from others like Gary Snyder, I became aware of how many shared interests that involved and of how many transformations had already taken place beyond the page, so to speak, and into the wide world outside. I knew Michael McClure's poetry before that and had inserted poems of his into Technicians of the Sacred, specifically the ghost tantras that he wrote in beast language as parallels to kindred ancient works from Aboriginal and Mantric sources, and to the sound poems as well of early modernists, Dadaists like Hugo Ball and Kurt Schwitters. His work throughout was electrifying to those of us watching, with great joy in the discovery, the poetry that was arising then among our own contemporaries. The beat surface, which he, like others, scratched, was an important part of this, but there were other surfaces and other depths as well. In McClure's case, there was from the beginning a mix of highly charged language, visceral, sexual, what he would later call mammalian, with an often overriding gentleness of tone and gesture. In the voice of those poems, I heard the voice of someone really speaking, but speaking in, what should we say, a bard's voice, with a touch, a memory of Blake and Shelley, poets who had moved him in the past, and probably into the present. This sense of voice and body, but really body-mind as one, led him also into an amazing series of theatrical works, like the often acclaimed and often banned The Beard, and on its musical side to interactions with the likes of Bob Dylan and the Doors, and to his later collaborations, still active with keyboardist Ray Manzarek. Now, all of this might mask, as it too often does with others, the full sweep of McClure's work. He is both a latter-day romantic, in the best sense, and a sharer in an experimental modernism that has produced our greatest poetry worldwide over the last 100 and more years. His grasp of poetry and art as well goes back to, I assume, high school days and first discoveries of surrealists and Dadaists who came before him, but also to the work of contemporaries who shared with him a front place in the heyday of the San Francisco Renaissance. And beyond the poetry as such, he is a devoted student of a range of knowledge in both arts and sciences, the biological and anthropological and ecological in particular, which feeds the poetry in turn and brings about a genuine and very unique lyricism of bioparticulars, meat science, as he calls it, or called it, and the finest celebration that I know of a universe of living forms. The recognition of this central aspect of his work has nowhere been better explained than by Francis Crick, our fellow San Diegan and a longtime admirer of McClure's, who said about him, quote, "What appeals to me most about Michael's poems is the fury and the imagery of them. I love the vividness of his reactions and the very personal turns and swirls of the lines. The worlds in which I myself live, the private world of personal reactions, the biological world, animals and plants and even bacteria chase each other through the poems, the world of the atom and molecule, the stars and the galaxies are all there. And in between, above and below, stands man, the howling mammal contrived out of meat by chance and necessity. If I were a poet, I would write like Michael McClure, if only I had his talent. As a poet myself, I can't go quite that far. Though I would have been pleased to be the one who once proclaimed, "I am a mammal patriot," or with a voice akin to Blake and Dickinson, and in a beautifully shaped series of elegantly centered lines to top it off. How sweet to be a rose by candlelight, or a worm by full moon. See the hopping flight a cricket makes. Nature loves the absence of mistakes. Or best of all, to be the poet who spoke to and through the raging beast and said, "Gor, gor, gor, gra, 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 gree, grar, rar, grar, rar, 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 grar, grar, rar. Be not sugar, but be love, looking for sugar. Grow, grow." It is my pleasure to introduce the author of the many books of Michael McClure, up to and including, most recently, Rain Mirror New Poems, which we're celebrating tonight. Michael McClure.
Maybe we should stop the evening there. That's a beautiful reading Jerome did of one of my ghost tantras at the end. So I'll start out with a ghost tantra. These were written in 1962. I loved, and this is a good one because it starts out in English and goes into beast language and then back into English, and back into beast language. I love to think of the red-purple rose in the darkness cooled by the night. We are served by machines making satins of sounds. Each blot of sound is a bud or a star. Body eats bouquets of the ear's vista. Gar, booty, eyes, ears, nose, steam thou. Roar, vorna, karumina drusirchna thee. The machines are too dull when we are lion bones that move and breathe. When we grow. Andri Maiktath, Sharu, Srida no Dimdes, Van Ithus Ro. Thank you. And I want to point out one thing before we start. I believe that I am a doctor in San Diego. I went to see Francis Crick at the Salk Institute once, and they said, "Oh yes, Dr. McClure." I think that they imagine that if you walk into the Salk Institute that you're a doctor. I take it that I am an honorary doctor in San Diego. I was reminded of my first reading here, which was in 1966. at a bookstore, not too dissimilar from this. And it's a very fine memory. Sure, it was a long time ago. So today, I'm going to read largely from Rain Mirror, which is comprised of two poems, a long poem comprised of haikus, and another long poem called Crisis Blossom, which is comprised of Mallarmé's, it comes from Mallarmé's idea that poetry is a language of a state of crisis. The long poem Crisis Blossom comes from one of those crises, or comes from many of those crises. I'm also going to read from my first book. This is Rain Mirror. But the book I wrote immediately after that, they both happen to be published at the same time by different presses, is my first book of Zen poetry. Immediately following this book, I had finished a psychophysical meltdown, went into the hospital for the first time in my life, and came out and began sitting in a regular practice. Certainly all. Am I too close to this? Is this whistling or doing funny things?
A little too close.
Of course, all my life I practiced with Gary and with Alan and many other friends. And thank you, Dennis. And this began a regular practice, and these Zen poems grew from that regular practice. I'll read you a few haikus from a poem called Haiku Edge. Oh, accident. Oh, perfect. Crushed snail. Like a star gone out. Hey, it's all consciousness, thumps of assault rifles and the stars. What soft, brown eyes the dog has as she shits on the deer's hoof print. These all come from an area in the Oakland Hills where I was living at this time. I mean, even hearing the assault rifles coming up from the lowlands, deer prints by the side of the road. The dusty blackberry shakes in the chopper roar. Ah, the spider web. Drops of rain mirror on the pink petals of the peyote flower. Pink Band-Aid, stuck to the asphalt, looks gray in moonlight while crickets sing. Moldy board smell. Ah, my grandpa's face appears in the air. Oh, hummingbird shadow on the black plum. No summer lightning, though. There's a freeway haiku. California freeway. 4 deer and a great blue heron in a field. Brake lights up ahead. Another freeway haiku. Hey, driver, your big, soft, steel, rubber-smelling car owns you. heron flies quickly over your head as you speak on the phone. Here's two about the night sky and other things. The Milky Way is another shiny cricket chirping. The universe of stars is just another baby cricket chirping. And then here's one. I see butterflies, you know, and I think of those light shows at the rock dances, back in days of yore, in Camelot. The butterfly in sunlight. Ah, light shows at the Fillmore. And I read that to Bruce Conner, the artist, and he said, I thought the light shows at the Avalon were a lot better. Of course, Bruce did the light shows at the Avalon. I have another poem, haiku. This one is dedicated to Bruce Conner. Butterflies swirling madly. Ah, light shows at the Avalon. You like that one more? Plum petals fall when the old dog's nails click on the asphalt. Look, there's a rabbit. No, it's maple leaves blowing down a driveway. The green apple core rolls along as the car passes it. And I'm going to read from Crisis Blossom, which is the second long poem in this book. And it's composed of 3 poems. Graftings is the first one, which, by the way, that idea had much to do with some ideas of Jerome's, Rottenberg's. And it was written during an extremely active period of my life traveling. I was performing quite a bit with Ray Manzarek, keyboardist of the Doors. He plays the piano, and I recite my poetry at the same time. And we decided that's the way to describe it. There's a video up there that just came out, which is a documentary about Ray and I performing together. We've been doing it about 10 years. And this was a particularly active year for us. We don't do it a lot. We do maybe 5 gigs a year, maybe 20 gigs a year. But it was a very busy spring and summer. And at the same time, my wife was a sculptor. My wife Amy and I traveled to Bryce Canyon and places like that that she needed and wanted to see for her sculpture. And at the same time, I was going with Ray to, oddly enough, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was the first poetry reading they'd ever had there. And to the Taos right from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to the Taos Poetry Circus up in the mountains. And a lot of colleges and coffee shops or night music clubs or any place that would have us. And it was extremely active. And when I got back from that, it was time to go to Bali, because Amy and I had always wanted to go to Bali. So we got on a plane and went to Bali. So these poems, these stanzas that make up Crisis Blossom, are written in many places, and the last stanzas in the first section are written in Bali. The first stanza, Grafting 1, says, "Now I understand the sexual addiction of my young manhood was a crucifixion, glittering and lovely as an ostrich boa and smashed mirrors seen on acid. Now I see that perception is a shape of the darkness seeing itself. Naked bodies in layers on shelves in space, and behind stalactites, alight with themselves, seduce me with fleshy softness of their meat, calves, forearms, and the perfumes. The perfumes are lost as moths in our hormonal storms, but they direct us. They guided me. My God. My God. No. My God. Don't. My God. Do this to me. Don't do this to me. I've looked down into it, and I come back with my eyes glazed. My eyes glazed. That twig has a rabbit's head. The orange flesh of the apricot where the mouth bites it is a hell heaven. A hell heaven of naked figures. The brown dimples of the bay as the plane lands are a horse's back. Don't do this to me. I love it. 3. And this begins with a quote from, not only from an earlier poem of mine, but that was a quote from Goethe. Incommensurable and incomprehensible are the best of poetic creations. Incommensurable and incomprehensible are the best of poetic creation, the old man sings. The galaxies are a river seen from this direction. The child knows it is all black behind the eyes, and the flesh is a swirl of hungry fantasies, just like shadows in kitten's fur. The black and yellow bee hums, and dry mud crunches in the divine cruelty of nature. The soft new soul, with its capsule of masks, tender and quivering, ascends into matter. Pink rocks slide over the cliff with a clatter. Smell of greasy food in the airport. That was written in Bryce Canyon in the Las Vegas airport. This one began with something that was in a dream from another poem. I am a god with a huge face. Lions and eagles pour out of my mouth. Big white square teeth and a red-purple tongue. There are magenta clouds around my head, and this is my throne room. Actors perform the drama of my being inside of you, wearing your skin. Our hunger is greater than our fear. My shoe slips on the red brick that is coated with slime of algae and moss. And the same fear that is ever there makes a hollyhock in the darkness. Where water moths with billowing antennae and black velvet heads vie in midair for the senses of their ladies. A small poem is a soul like an opal. Water moths are really gorgeous. I hadn't seen one before. And I flew into this poem after seeing them. Where water moths with billowing antennae and black velvet heads vie in midair for the senses of their ladies, which is the courting of these water moths. You are my memories of you holding my hand. I want to go anywhere. I am a flowering. You are the touch of brown leather and silk embroidered with mauve and green florals. Just as a dolphin surges from the waves and re-enters the slate water wrinkled as memory in a storm of foam. Ripples. Hear the sound of a gull as pained as the agonies in my ears. Ship's bells ring, and their cups of tea with sugar. Now, a life later. At last. Now. Finally. Finally. I lie with my head on the stomach of my lover. This was in New Mexico. I didn't see it on the page, but I remember. Which doesn't mean that the poem, it means that like the instant this takes place is in New Mexico. It begins somewhere else with other sets of recollections, and then it is in the place, and then it investigates the experiences of that instant of being in that place, if you follow me. This is all a string of pearls with reflections in the opulent, glimmering surface of endless flaws, making a surface for the fingertips to touch while remembering perfumes. Caves and caverns and kitten's fur are very quiet above the ripple of muscles. Stars are born on high cliffs in nebulae. Tiny green peas swell in the sleek pod while the flowering continues. Mickey Mouse lashes his tail, and his saucer eyes stare with rage and desuetude. The young red-tailed hawk screams at his mother for food as the sun goes down. Never have things smelled so good. It's the essence of the chaparral. Can you hear okay out there?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. This begins with Suzanne McCorkle singing Chica Chica Boom Chick. That's in case this line sounds familiar in the opening. It don't make sense, but it's immense. Roar of the engines through the stocking soles of the feet and your soft nipples on the screen of my eyes. Shapes made without obstacles, we walk and smile. Journeys take on the glisten of salad dressing on slices of purple cabbage. Sooty wings of a butterfly beat and twitch, making black patterns of edges. Around you, all things are erotized. This one was written during a Haydn quartet, but I don't remember where. Miro knows it is all play, and Pollock understands the unconscious power. Consciousness rises up in a green wave, like a darting grebe, neck outstretched and wings like fins, fishing in the crest. The beach sun behind makes it a sculpture. The wind and gravel stir shapes of uprising reason. Ears, eyes, nose, tongue grow rich to accept such carving, and we are blank spots of blackness sprouting tiny, many-colored flowers.